Well, talking about how it all started, at that point, Lowman didn't, they just had turkey calls, my understanding. And then in the early 80s, you developed what we now know as the modern day grunt call. Explain how that came to be and the resistance you got from regular hunters when you said, "Hey, I've got this that'll help you."
Well, that's a neat story in itself. We going to work for Mr. Harper, and it was all really about turkey. And although they all hunted, and Loman had at the time, they were one of the largest game call companies in the world, and had a lot of different calls. Waterfowl was big, and turkey was growing with them. And they even had a deer call in their line. They had a bleat call. It was called the Alaskan bleat call. And I'd never hunted with it, never used it, but they had it in their line. And but after I went to work for him, it was certainly coming up on deer season. We're talking deer and all this, that, and the other. Well, previous in 1976, I had learned from a friend of mine. He and his brother were hunting, and his brother saw a small forky buck kind of messing with some does, and it made this grunting sound. Nobody had ever heard it before. Nobody ever described it before of anybody I knew. And so I'm working in the mines at the time with him, and he shared this information with me. So I'm thinking, well, what the heck? And I was an avid bow hunter, and I hunted with a recurve, and I needed animals super, super close. And I thought, well, there's nothing I wouldn't try to get a deer close to me to get a shot back then at that time. So he pinched his nose and mimicked this sound, and I practiced with him. And next thing you know, I'm off hunting one morning, and a buck goes by, and I pinch my nose and make a little grunt, and that buck stops, and I pinch my nose and grunt again, and that buck turns. He's out there 80 yards. He turns and walks right to me. He turns broadside at 18 steps, and I shoot under him. I missed the deer completely. But it just, a light bulb come on inside. I thought, oh my gosh, this is golden. And for the next 4 or 5 years, we kept it, we meaning it was a small group of guys that we hunted with that worked in the mines, kept it a secret. No, never told anybody, just 2 or 3 of us, 4 of us, we would talk about our successes and what we were doing with our vocal cords to make grunts. So I knew how effective it was. I was calling and killing deer and bucks. Weren't big bucks; they were just bucks. And but man, I realized how awesome this was. And so we jumped forward 4 or 5 years. I'm now working at Lowman Game Calls. Came in as a turkey caller, and we're talking about the upcoming deer season. And Mr. Harper said, "Brad, what do you use the bleat deer call?" I said, "No, sir, I don't." He said, you don't like calls? I said, oh, yeah. I just don't use a bleat. I use a grunt. And he looked at me real strange. He said, what's a grunt? And that kind of started it. I explained the history to him. And I'm green. I'm a hillbilly. I'm a young guy. I'm now in the corporate world and don't have a clue what I'm doing. I just explained to him, Mr. Harper, this is a sound that I learned. I've been fooling bucks with it now for 4 or 5 years, and it works. And he said, what's it sound like? I demonstrated. He said, can we get together and make this call? I said, yeah. So we go out, gather up a bunch of duck call, all kinds of duck call paraphernalia, reeds and tone chambers and barrels. And I sat for hours and hours playing with those reeds and shortening them and using different tone chambers. But anyway, the process, I finally came up with a sound that I thought was, man, this is awful close. And all it was basically was a modified duck call. And I came back in and said, here it is. Here's what I think it sounds like. And we built, a handful of them, and deer season coming on, we all took them to the woods and with our hunting throughout that fall season, and realized that by golly, they worked. And so the next year, the next SHOT Show, I think this was about 83 or 84, we brought that new grunt call to the market at the SHOT Show. And I believe the SHOT Show at that time was in New Orleans, if I recall. My memory isn't great, but we brought out the very first grunt deer call. And it was not well accepted. Nobody had heard of it. Nobody ever even heard the term. Nobody was teaching it. And yet, we're trying to sell it. People are coming into the booth. What's new for this year? Well, we had several new products in different lines, and all of a sudden I'd get, okay, now we got a new deer call. What do you mean a new deer call? Deer don't make noise. All they do is snort. No, we got a grunt. Well, what's a grunt? Well, I'd blow that modified duck call, and people would just look at me, and most of them would be respectful and say, well, we've never heard of nothing like that. I don't know if that'll sell. I mean, nobody's, you've never seen an article, never seen anybody write anything about it, never seen a biologist comment on it. It wasn't part of the local language because nobody knew about it. So it was not well received. And I can remember that was like in January. By my February and March, I'm doing seminars, deer hunting seminars, turkey hunting seminars at various spots. I'm doing seminars at various, sporting events and trade show, outdoor show, travel shows, whatever. And I go to Missouri Deer Classic in Columbia, Missouri. And here again, I'm a young man. I'm in my early 20s. And most of the guys in the audience, and it was 99% men in the audience, and there was probably 200, 250 people in the audience, and they're coming to hear a young guy talk about deer calling or deer hunting. And I went through my whole deer routine, as far as rubber boots and tracking, reading signs, scrapes, and tree stand play. Went through the whole deer hunting routine, and I got to the end. I said, guys, I want to share something with you that is new, but I'm telling you, it works like a charm. And I said, we've come up with a call. It's called the grunt deer call. It simulates bucks that are active during the rut. And when you blow it, all you're doing is saying, I'm a deer, come here, there's something going on. And then when the rut kicks in and the bucks are more active, the better it works. And they're all on the edge of their seats. And I take the call, I lift it up, and I went back. And literally half the guys in the audience fell out of their chairs laughing. It embarrassed the heck out of me. It's scary. I'm petrified. I'm young, new at this seminar game, but in my heart, I know I'm telling them the truth. I'm telling you, this works for me, and I'm a deer hunter. This is my passion, and it'll work for you too. And yet they laugh. I have men come up after the seminar and get in my face and say, hey, I've been deer hunting 40 years and, 30 or whatever it is. And I ain't never heard a deer make a sound like that. You're nuts. They don't do that. And I'd say, sir, I'm telling you the truth, But we fought those battles, and it took a couple of years. It really took a couple of years, and actually took another company or two to come on board to sell deer calls to really get the thing jump started. We laid the groundwork and we convinced some people, but it took other companies jumping on board 2 years down the road. And all of a sudden, well, if Loman's got it now and Nightingale's got one, and, whoever else, Haydell, I think, come on with one pretty early. And all of a sudden it was giving it some validity. And another interesting point, there was about the time we introduced the call, about that same year, towards the end of the year. So the call had been on the market for a year. I get a message from a biologist in Texas. And the guy's name was Larry Richardson. I'll remember that name. I met him a couple times personally, but most of the correspondence by phone. But Larry was studying pen-raised deer in Texas, our ranch high-fence deer in Texas. And he came up and captured a grunt on tape recording. And he contacted me and he said, you guys have, I know you have the grunt call, but do you have any audio? No, we don't have any audio. We just have the call and we hunt with it. He said, I've captured the audio. And he sent me a cassette, and the cassette was called The Acoustics of White-tailed Deer. And it took that a couple years to take hold. But once people start realizing, well, the Loman guys came out with it, and now we got a couple other companies that have kind of come on board, and now we have a biologist that captured the sound on tape. It all gave it validity, and then within 2 or 3 years after that, it was the greatest, the greatest selling game call, I believe, of all time. The numbers were just super, super strong, and they still are today.